Hello, everyone. Welcome to another beer event, and this one is kind of hosted by the Social Theory and Education SIG. So it's great to know that there's so many people today wanting to be part of our event. And basically, I am going to introduce our speaker, and then we'll have questions and answers at the end. But make sure that you can use the interactive spaces that are available to you to show us how you're interacting with the ideas that are being presented throughout the discussion. So I'm going to very briefly introduce Mark, and I'm really excited about today's presentation. So Mark Murphy is a reader in education and public policy in the School of Education at the University of Glasgow. And he has published widely in the field of social theory and applied research with books including Social Theory, A New Introduction, which is this one here that he will be talking about today. So I'm really excited about that. And he has also written other books that are also very relevant for those interested in using critical theory in research, as for example, Habermas and Social Research Between Theory and Method, that was published by Routledge in 2017. Theory and Method on Bourdieu, Education and Society, that was published in 2016, and Bourdieu, Habitus and Social Research, The Art of Application in 2015. Mark is also the editor of the book series Social Theory and Methodology in Education Research that is published by the Bloomsbury Press. So without further ado, I will pass on the microphone to Mark, and I look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Christina, for that introduction, and hello to everybody who's joined us today on a beautiful sunny day. It is, at least in Stockton anyway, on Tees, and I hope it is for yourselves as well. So thank you for giving up your precious time to listen to myself and Christina today. It'd be great to get some questions off you as well. I think the first thing on the agenda is an interactive poll. So if you could complete this, and then we have another one later as well. So if you just take a little bit of time to fill this in, and then I'll continue. Did everyone get a chance to fill in the poll? Some very interesting responses to that question. What is the pedagogical value of social theory to education research? I see more coming: empowerment, broadening understanding. Reproduction, illumination, shaping perspective, criticality, a critical lens, all very familiar words in the field of social theory, as well as critical pedagogy. So that's a nice opener. I think we're on fairly common ground when it comes to my new textbook, and how also I positioned it, and how also I wrote it, but also how I positioned it in relation to this talk today. So thank you so much for that. There'll be another poll near the end before we go on to questions and answers at the end. So it'd be good to hear from you then as well. With this kind of general understanding of the pedagogical value of social theory, I'd also share as well. And so hence why I'm claiming effectively that social theory is a form of critical pedagogy. So I'm going to take the time today to expand on that theme and to try and explain what I mean, and and effectively what's behind the book. I mean, the aim of the book is what I've put here. So it delivers a thematic and conceptual overview of the field of social theory, which is a very big field. I do like a challenge, though, has to be said. I feel that it's a vital source of ideas for education research. Not that the book was written primarily for education researchers, although there's quite a lot of education examples in it. Well, given our co-hats as co-conveners for BIRA, that's obviously an important aspect as well for today's talk, but particularly those who position education in the context of broader struggles over social justice. So you can see from the get-go the political nature of this book, and if it's something it shares with critical pedagogy more broadly, it's that political aspect of the book. And just so you know, the book was actually originally commissioned. I don't know if anybody's listening in who's also written books or in the process of writing books. But sometimes we get commissioned, we get publishers who come to us and want us to deliver whatever it is that they're looking for. And so in this case, that's what actually happened. Palgrave approached me, I think primarily because of some of the stuff I'd written, but also because of the website socialtheoryapplied.com, which piqued the interest of the publishers. And I think going back a little bit now, the ideas were kind of pedagogical, the notion that I and colleagues were engaging with readers in a way that they could understand the ideas. And let's face it, social theory can be a challenge for those of us who are new to the field. And even if we're not new to the field, it still goes on to be a challenge. So that's the background of the book. And whether or not I would have written it if I hadn't been commissioned, who knows? Who knows the answer to that question? I would go to my grave not being able to answer that question. Well, let me also emphasize that it was a labor of love, an emphasis on both terms, love and labor. So I'm going to talk about the background, the rationale, the critical pedagogical elements of the book. And then as the session progresses, I'll get into the kind of nuts and bolts, meat and potatoes of the actual book itself. So I'll detail the structure and content. The key element, why I bravely pitched it as a new introduction, is that it's organized around thematic chapters such as the economy, language, culture, knowledge, the body. Other ones include social justice. I tell you, it's very hard to find a chapter on social justice that does the job of an introduction, believe you me. A chapter on the state as well, civil society, emotions, the self, and governance. as well, which again was kind of written from a self-interested perspective, because given that I teach about governance, I couldn't find a chapter that did the job in terms of theorizing governance. So there was that element, it was kind of the kind of classroom pedagogical element of it, but also the sense that the books, I don't know about you guys, I've got whole shelves full of books on social theory, and many of them are excellent, but they don't quite do what I'm looking for in terms of my actual professional teaching. And so that's where a lot of it came from originally, the idea for doing this. So, because the approach allows for stronger links, and I'll expand on this, to be made between theory and forms of practice in the Bourdieuian sense of the term. So that could be educational practice, professional practice, social practices, governance practices, practice of the state, epistemological practices. And it encourages the reader to reflect on theory and its relevance for social life. And that's what I've intended to do in the book. Sorry, let me just go back. So what I'm going to cover today is broadly three interlinked aspects that speak to this theme of social theory as critical pedagogy. So the first one I'll come to is the political nature of social theory and the implications of this for teaching social theory. An element that's sometimes forgotten when it comes to talking about social theory. The desire, secondly, the desire to engage with what Richard Johnson famously called really useful knowledge, as opposed to merely useful knowledge, and how social theory can deliver such forms of knowledge. And if we're not in the business of the producing and disseminating knowledge, I don't know what we are in education. And then thirdly, the importance of textbook curricula to critical pedagogical approaches. So, and then that's when I get more into the actual content of the book. And so I'll engage with each of these issues and provide some examples from the book as well, more to the end. Okay, so I'm gonna now go on to the topic of the political nature of social theory and the implications of teaching this for teaching social theory. Now, I have to say, actually, I don't know whether this is funny or not. I think the political elements probably became more obvious and apparent to me as I read the book, or as I wrote the book. Sorry, as I read the book, as I wrote the book over the main stretch of the book took me a couple of years. But sometimes we have to kind of produce something and then reflect back and go, yeah, this is actually quite political, quite a political endeavor. So that kind of expanded a lot of my thinking as well. But really what I was doing along the way was bringing out the kind of political nature of social theory. And it's interesting because I went down the route of doing it thematically. That illuminated, as somebody indicated earlier, provided a critical lens onto the politicized nature of theory. That's an interesting thing in itself, quite Dewey-esque. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this political aspect. So social theory, and it's not surprising in its numerous forms, whether it be feminism, post-colonialism, Marxism, is a necessary and inevitable response to conditions of subjugation, inequality, and injustice across social life. And some of this political nature I brought out in the book as well. So the links to real life conditions and real life struggles gives social theory its raison d'etre. It justifies why it gives it a purpose. It provides forms of critical reasoning. The notion of critical reasoning being especially crucial to social theory, in particular, the kind of Frankfurt School end of things. And let's face it, we need as much critical reasoning in the world in 21st century as we can possibly get. provides a form of critical reasoning that seeks to understand what Gramsci called and others, the subaltern position of particular groups that live under these conditions. So that's its main purpose. So it isn't a kind of detached intellectual agenda. It's embedded itself in historical events. And these theories, whether it be feminist theory or post-colonial theory or Marxism as a response to rapid capitalist industrialization, reflects the political times that we live in and develop in tandem with historical developments. Of course, we always live in history. We can never live outside it. You know, it's basically impossible to do that. So social theory at its best positions us within these historical junctures, the latter in fact preceding the former. The early 21st century, which we're in now, it's a funny old beast. I think many of us feel that we're living in historical times, but of course we always live in historical times, but maybe some are more less in your face than others. But we live in a world which provides sufficient evidence of the need for theoretical engagement in the face of, let's face it, a really unstable world economy, which, don't get me started on that topic. The price of diesel is shot through the roof. You know, basic stuff like that illustrates how unstable, how interconnected the world economy is and how affected we are by it. We also live in a very dangerously fragmented sense of social solidarity, a race to the bottom when it comes to education values, which speaks to a lot of our concerns and is a major issue in public education. Social theory comes into its own when tackling such deep-rooted social problems. Educators reach for social theory to try and understand, as people talked about in the slide, as a critical lens to understand and frame our knowledge of whatever these social problems are, give us a deeper understanding. So social theory accepts and understands the political nature of sectors such as education. No wonder people like Pierre Bourdieu, Michel Foucault, since the 1970s have become so vital. So instead of aiming to depoliticize the field, and it could be education or it could be health or whatever, social theory is explicit in framing the issues affecting education as already politicized. So the notion that you can depoliticize education effectively would be seen as a baseless ambition. And of course, in the field of critical pedagogy, you'll see that reiterated by, of course, famous authors such as Paulo Freire and bell hooks. So social theory offers researchers this wide-ranging conceptual apparatus that addresses the social roots of educational issues in ways that without it would be quite difficult to do. So because it focuses on issues such as language, culture, knowledge, systems of governance, when we see these approaches, this apparatus of concepts applied to education, they inevitably ask a different type of research question, which leads us down a very different path compared to, for example, randomly controlled trials, focus on school effectiveness and so on. It can unsettle, take it for granted, assumptions about schools, you know, colleges, universities as producers of human capital, even nation building, which is for a lot of my students a key imperative. Depending on where you are in the world, of course. At their best, applied social theories provide a direct and forceful alternative to the hegemony. Here's a classic social theoretical concept via Antonio Gramsci. They provide this alternative, the hegemonic power And let's face it, they're fairly hegemonic these days. League tables, teacher performativity, education markets, and dismantling of public education systems. Gives us powerful tools to explore these areas and to provide a critique, an alternative world to them. Let me just continue this theme. There is linked to that notion. We talk a lot about evidence-based policy in education and other public policy domains, and so social theory driven education research provides an interesting take on evidence informed policy, because it provides an alternative form of education, of evidence-based policy, using different tools. But over the years, it has provided a very strong and quite complex set of evidence bases to counteract kind of dominant notions of performativity and so on. Without that, we would have only one evidence base. Now, of course, we have a case where, you know, sort of neoliberal forms of evidence-based policy tend to rule the roost, but this effectively has provided an alternative evidence base using theoretically driven applied research. For some reason, my screen has gone off. Let's come back on again. So just to continue this, this idea of the political nature and what lies behind social theory, there's a deeper historical and political context to social theory, which is often not referred to, or in some cases kind of forgotten. Because we obviously live along we've progressed a lot from 19th century, but this is a context that was constructed out of revolutionary fervor in the 19th century, the French American Revolution, particularly the French Revolution, the radical ideas of the Enlightenment, the famous call to arms, liberty, equality, fraternity, stroke solidarity, underpin much of the impetus behind the development of social theoretical ideas, as well as maybe you might consider the less positive elements, the rise of massive capitalist industrialization across Western countries. We also see the development of colonialism and that dark underbelly of genocide. And then we have in the 20th century, we have the development of unreason and fascism as well, and that type of barbarism, which is also fed in to the context of social theory. So all these combined resonate in the field of social theory, the history of which is littered with efforts to deal with these possibilities and the downsides as well, and the ideals, especially the ones of liberty, equality, and solidarity, and the possibilities that they represent for society. So from this historical angle, social theory can be viewed as an intellectual and political project designed to situate the modern social world against these ideals. It takes it to task. Its various guises probe and question the workings of social institutions, education being one of the key ones. No matter what form it comes in, a community college, doesn't really matter. But the educational institutions are theories used to probe and question the workings, the practices of these institutions, and also test their adherence to the principles that are supposed to underpin societies. If we didn't have this conceptual apparatus, how could we do the probing and the questioning? So they test this adherence in the face of competing principles, which often rule the roost, win the day: efficiency, productivity, in the shape of league tables, school outcomes, etc., exam results, productivity, consumption, and commodification, and also kind of neoliberal individualism. We have this set of competing agendas, but on the other, we have something that says, hold on a second, this isn't quite matching up to what we're supposed to be doing. So they also gauge the distance between the real and the ideal. And that space between these two is central to so much of social theory over the years and into the 21st century. So the likes of Marx and Hegel and so on, they might be considered old, but they're, many people argue that they're still relevant. But we're also seeing new versions of theory come into play. So it's not just a question of learning what people said before, it's a question of adapting, updating, and developing new theories that more closely match the world that we live in. We live in a world now, and I have to say, I don't consider myself particularly old, but I say this to my students, I sometimes look back with a certain level of nostalgia for the 20th century. And in a way, how more comfortable I was then. Digital technologies and the way the world is now is very different. And I say that as somebody who's currently middle-aged. So the things have moved on dramatically, quite quickly in 20, 30 years. So the theories themselves need to be updated and revised, reconfigured, but also maybe develop new ideas to understand the way that we engage with the world now. So the political nature is very strong in social theory. So, and hence why it's popular among a certain strand of committed education researcher. And so let me just go on to the connected second point, which is in relation to what Richard Johnson called really useful knowledge. I don't know if any of you, obviously I can't see you, I don't know who you are, but Richard Johnson came up with this great notion of really useful knowledge as a counterpoint to kind of merely useful knowledge that can allow us to fit into systems, but without questioning those systems, without questioning our position in life, without offering us a perspective transformation, and so on. Very, very useful way, a really useful way to understand the explanatory power of knowledge, and knowledge being a key theme. There's one chapter in the book completely devoted to the topic of knowledge, and rightly so. So really useful knowledge arrives in the shape of conceptual work, particularly. And I'll come on to this topic again in the next section. So when you break it down to its essence, the conceptual ideas are crucial. And one of my, and again, I'll expand on this in a little bit. One of my key issues with the way social theory has been pitched before, taught, and written about in textbooks, it tends to maybe downplay this element of it in favor of schools of thought. In fact, that's the way I was taught, was by, so you start with your Marxism, then you go on to, then you go on to functionalism, feminism, and so on, thought like that. But actually, the really useful knowledge, that is useful knowledge, and I'm not saying that it isn't important to learn about the schools. It is, but the schools are not an end in themselves. So I think we are in danger of maybe siloizing and codifying these a little bit too much and developing halos over each of them. It's these kind of concepts here: public sphere, discourse, ethics, and colonization, which drew my attention in my own work many years ago. For those Foucauldians among you, governmentality, subjectivation, panopticism, parasia. What a box of tools that have been provided by Foucault in relation to understanding education policy, education professionals, education practices. There's the concepts that we draw on in our work. They're like manna from heaven when we come along and go, what is cultural capital? Oh, cultural capital, one of the biggest ideas that has blown apart understandings of education and equity, bringing in the notion of culture, which 50 years ago now was fairly revolutionary, in particularly British sociology of education. Doxa as well, a favorite topic of favorite concept of Christina's, I have to say. Habitus as well. Well, we know how big that one is in the field. And then you have difference, supplement, deconstruction, the kind of Derridian post-structural angle, which has its own vaulted position in certain strands of theory-driven education research as well, and also going into the philosophical end as well. So these are all established parts of the academic lexicon, a testament to their impressive explanatory power. They offer us a new language to be able to understand and interpret what is actually going on in the field of education as well. So without these ideas, we'd be in trouble in terms of expanding our approaches and our understanding. Where would we be without particularly people like Foucault and Bourdieu, those two, the most cited social theorists in the field of education? By far, nobody comes close, in fact, which is interesting. Habermas comes lower down, Judith Butler, Nancy Fraser, Beatrix Spivak come lower down in terms of citations. And this is an international development. So colleagues like Michael Mood done us a great service showing how Bourdieu has expanded the field of Chinese education research. His book on Bourdieu, his co-edited book on Bourdieu and Chinese education, excellent example of how social theory has traveled. So scholars have adapted these concepts to help examine so many facets of modern life. And of course, the education field is no different. If you look at other fields like management, health studies, political science, these concepts have really crossed borders. Public sphere being a great example of how it's expanded and become so prominent in communication studies, in literature, literary studies, cultural studies, sociology, public administration, you name it. So, and education is no different, developing a strong attachment to ideas such as cultural capital. And you yourselves will have a preference for certain ideas, and and probably a bit like myself, use them as a kind of home, an intellectual home, where you then, in a way, use them as an intellectual lens to go and explore other ideas and how they fit into your original thinking and what piqued your interest and what got you engaged in. But a lot of it's down to a particular set of ideas and concepts. So their influence of these ideas is also extended to the broader public sphere as well. Authors such as Spivak, Judith Butler, and so on, combining the role of social theorists with that of public intellectual. They still exist, folks, thankfully. So they provide spaces within which education researchers, as well as others, can adopt an intellectual stance to their subject with some level of legitimation and credibility. And I have to say that I think the public intellectual potential of social theory driven education research is probably not being mined as much as it could be, because it does offer an alternative epistemology and as I said, evidence-based to very dominant understandings of education outcomes and performativity. It's also evident that the theories of thinkers like Spivak are delivered with enormous intent. So it's political, it's designed to help adjust, alter, transform whatever social conditions that they're interested in. And so, for example, Derrida's deconstructive approach has found a great deal of application, productive application in fields such as post-colonial studies through the work of people like Stuart Hall. The critical social science of Bourdieu, which, you know, without Bourdieu, there wouldn't be a British Journal of Sociology of Education, probably, or the archaeology and genealogies of Foucault, Foucault being, you know, probably the most cited person in the Journal of Education Policy. You know, looms over that journal, and because of the historical development of that journal as well. So, and then linked into these two notions. So far I've talked about the political element. I've talked also about the desire that social theory delivers really useful knowledge, which I also embody and had as a core aim as well. These two are really significant. But then also the kind of third element to this is the importance of what I call textbook curricula. In textbook curricula to critical pedagogical approaches. So when getting more to the actual book now, which is set as a textbook, yeah. So it's set up in a way to be critically pedagogical. Now, I would see myself as within that general ballpark of what we understand to be critical pedagogy. But I think critical pedagogy sometimes can be seen purely as kind of classroom teaching, you know, the kind of oral tradition of pedagogical approaches. But I think there's also a curricular element as well that is vital. That textbooks like this, I would argue, is critical pedagogy. Now, I actually had argued that in the introduction. This book ended up at 140,000 words. No, it was 160, got reduced a lot thanks to reviewers. Always part of the job, of course. Some of them thought that my position on really useful knowledge and critical pedagogy was presumptuous for some reason. But really, that's what the book is about. It's about providing a textbook curricula, which is geared towards a critical pedagogy. So let me try and expand on that now, linked into my notion of really useful knowledge and the political aspect of it as well. So, and the thing also is, designing a book like this, you know, all books are labor intensive. They take up a lot of your time. But the book like this is actually quite tricky, probably the trickiest thing I've ever done, because it offers this new introduction to a textbook, a critical pedagogical textbook, in a number of ways. So, trying to be true to my word, I've adopted the position that social theory is a politicized field, and this aspect should be brought very much to the fore in our attempts to come to make sense of the complex arguments, motivations, etc., put forth in social theory. I did say in the preface to the book, any efforts to portray the field as value-free or politically neutral, you just get off the horse, people. Doomed to failure. It doesn't make any sense. Social theory isn't sociology, although sociology clearly has a massive input in, but social theory transcends disciplinary barriers, with great inputs from history, anthropology, cultural studies, English literature, you name it. But it's a kind of political wing, in a way, of the humanities and social sciences. So we find that home, which reflects these kind of political concerns of many academics and public intellectuals. So the political aspect needs to be acknowledged, appreciated, and just as importantly, understood. So that's the kind of first aspect. And that aspect then is fed in to the other key aspects, key features of the book. So going back to what I said earlier, organization around key thematic areas such as culture, the economy, and the self. So, this is this is the the meat and potatoes of textbooks, how you organize them, how you deliver them. In my mind, thematic grouping is more effective and more engaging pedagogically than what is now the standard approach of grouping chapters by school of thought. Although there have been examples which have done it maybe a little bit more thematically. But the norm is still to do it by school of thought. And let me say something here. One of the reasons why is because of the role of reviewers and publishers, because the courses themselves, and these courses in social theory can be massive. Money spinners, they take a lot of students in, people want textbooks for them. They're still taught, like, here's feminism, here's post-structuralism, here's post-colonialism. They're taught like that. So the books get adopted because they reflect the curriculum. So a book like mine is in danger of falling by the wayside. But sure, I plow on anyway. Everyone loves an optimist. But I remember one of the reviewers saying, there was 14 reviewers, I kid you not. One of the reviewers saying, oh, I wouldn't adopt this book because I teach it through school of thought. And the same reviewer came back towards the end of because there was different stages of review. Towards the end, they go, oh, you know what? On reflection, maybe I might think about changing my curriculum to reflect what's in the book. After giving me a kicking earlier, I suppose we all have to go on a journey, don't we? Well, that's the point, because the thing is, I was taught like this, and so my own experience, and also teaching, of course, over decades, other people, theory related areas. It's through this experience, that the experiential knowledge, that gears me towards this notion of critical pedagogy as textbook curricula. And then when you actually get down into the practice of it, you have to take that into account and rearrange your chapters to reflect that. So each chapter is used as a platform to compare and contrast different approaches. So I don't know if anybody's got access to the book, but for example, the knowledge chapter, and I can't find for love or money a chapter of knowledge, but how important is it to education? But so I had to do it, schmuck that I am. But anyway, the knowledge chapter, I start off talking about the importance of knowledge. I go back to Daniel Bell's The Coming of Post-Industrial Society, and the importance of epistemology. And but I get straight to the heart of the matter and talk about the nature of objectivity and knowledge, the notion of value-free science, what that means in a world of supposed disinterest, evidence-based policy. And I go back to Karl Mannheim, those of you who know your sociology of knowledge. And I go from there into debates over positivism. The great positivist debates took place in the 60s and has never ended, although even with all the debates that we've had, positivism still rules the roost. Then I go on to the famous work by Berger and Luckman on the social construction of knowledge, which is still very dominant, sometimes unacknowledged, but a really key cornerstone, a lot of the work that we do in fields such as education. And then I go on, and a lot of it's chronological. So then I go on to Foucault, the power and archaeology of knowledge work. Of course, that knowledge being key to Foucault's ideas. I have a key concept from Donna Haraway, the classic notion of situated knowledge, which was a great alternative to positivistic notions, the God concept that she called it. And then I go on to expand on these and provide another alternative to positive in the shape of indigeneity, the work of Boaventura de Sousa Santos's work. And then at the end of the chapter, I have a section which looks at applied work in the field of education. So I have 3 different examples of the politics of academic knowledge. So, people talk about, engagement, active learning, all this stuff. That's what I'm trying to do. And but also try and bring out the potential, the real potential to deliver critical pedagogy in a way that really engages, provides really useful knowledge to our students. And I have to say, I have my own students in mind. I mean, I on my of course I have on education and public policy, I make them suffer. They have to read 3 chapters out of the book, but these chapters were geared with these people in mind, and how to apply it in fields such as education. The third key feature, sorry, in the book is its underpinning pedagogical approach. So the book connects to current social issues in the chapters. So you'll see here from the chapter on the economy, which, to be fair, actually ended up as a chapter because of the reviewers. So the reviews are very useful, don't get me wrong. They are. Oh, it's always good to have different opinions to bring, although sometimes it can be a bit of a case of too many cooks. But delivering a chapter on the economy for me, it's obvious to link to the world, the economic world that we're in now, which lives in the shadow of the 2008 world financial crisis, which in some ways is having knock-on effects in terms of culture, in terms of issues to do with knowledge, fragmentation, solidarity, imperialism, you name it. We still live in the shadow of that. So, and other things I link to inequality, austerity, of course. So it's important for me to ensure the reader, so start where they're at, that classic kind of adult education idea. It's also kind of critical pedagogical idea, but don't leave them there, but encourage them to think more critically about issues such as power, identity, and inequality. So, I'm fully aware that when you deliver work like this, yeah, I mean, I can explain it in language like this, the spread of the speed of the spread of the economic turmoil caught everyone by surprise, I say here, but I've still got to get into, Marx. I've got to get into theories of alienation, commodification, gender theories of labor, Harry Braben's theories on de-skilling, but at least we're starting from a position of the kind of experiential knowledge before we go on to engage with these other ideas. So that was a guiding principle of the book right across the chapters as well. So linked into these these ideas were, again, the nuts and bolts of the book, and including different elements to the textbook as well, which for those who use textbooks, you'll know what I mean. But actually, they're quite labor intensive. That they're really important. So they add to our knowledge base and help enhance the understanding that takes place from reading the basic text. So I have, key movements. So this is a nod to the importance of schools of thought. So there's sections on post-colonialism, functionalism, pragmatism. That they're interspersed right across the book. I have to say, I do think that a lot of this material is available to some degree online. That we live in an age where knowledge, written knowledge, and also through podcasts and so on, is actually available. So you can go onto Wikipedia, many other sites, if you want to look up what feminist theory means or post-colonial theory, you will find examples of that. We don't tend to find detailed chapters on topics like social justice. So that's my thinking. You will find it. So there's a bit of, you might say that there's a kind of a link, or maybe an assumed, rightly or wrongly, link to what you might call disruptive technology, such as Wikipedia. I also have, so there's sections. I'll come back to key concepts in a bit. There's also key terms which don't quite fit with key concepts, such as Cartesianism and dialectics, the kind of concepts that give us headaches and trying to figure out what they are, so trying to explain them in summary form. All chapters have questions at the end. There's also quite a detailed glossary as well in the book. And then, of course, there is all the way through, each chapter has a section on a key theorist. So this example here is Judith Butler. Habermas is in chapter 3, Nancy Fraser's in there, Gayatri Spivak, all people who have dedicated so much of their academic life to developing ideas that have really caused so much rupture and transformation in the field. Butler being a great example, since her work on gender trouble, bodies that matter, really had so much positive effect in the humanities and social sciences. So yeah, each chapter has a key concept, such as embodiment. We'll come back to that in a second. And also a nod to the original website, Social Theory Applied, and which is kind of part of the rationale for the book as well. This feature covers key applications of a social theory in the research literature, such as chapter 4 on the economy. The applied one is looking at how Harry Braverman's classic de-skilling thesis has been used and developed and expanded quite amazingly up until the present day. It's a really interesting work on de-skilling and the degradation of labor. So again, to help readers to develop their critical understanding. I'm getting towards the end now, so I just got a couple of slides left, and we have a poll at the end. But just other things. So there's other elements to the book that also I adapted and I developed as I went. So there are across the book debates in social theory. One of them, as I referred to, the positivism debate that took place in the 60s, famous one, if you know your sociology of knowledge, between Karl Popper and Theodore Adorno. Really fascinating stuff, which resonates with debates that go on today. And there's other ones across the book as well. For example, Nancy Fraser and Axel Honneth's work on recognition and redistribution. I also have suggested readings, which I've annotated and said, look, I think these are really good works that people can get their teeth into, particularly books as well, because I accept that maybe people don't have access to journal papers. And then there's in summary sections of each of chapter, which reiterates and summarizes probably the most difficult thing to do that at the end of each chapter. So I was very happy when they were done. But yeah, they were a challenge to do. But that, I suppose, is what our job is as educators, is to kind of, I suppose, well, a principle, make the strange familiar. The classic one is make the familiar strange, the C. Wright Mills idea of the sociological imagination. But it's also to make the strange familiar as well, is also a guiding principle too. So you can see with this box here, the social theory applied box on the social construction of reality, how to bring out Berger and Luckman's key ideas about the way in which we collectively construct our understandings of the world. That's what the idea is. The original ideas were. It wasn't about relativism. They weren't relativists when it came to knowledge. Their approach was, we actually construct knowledge collectively and socially. That work has been taken into many different avenues, and I try to be quite as international as I can when people are looking at different ways this is being used in the world. And and again, getting back to the point about the importance of the concepts. Yeah, I have to say the concepts, everything matters in social theory, but really the potential really comes to the fore when we look at concepts like emotional labor, which I suppose has entered the popular lexicon as well. Arlie Hochschild's, quite Marxist, Braverman, C. Wright Mills' take on particularly gendered emotional labor in the managed heart, and how that's being used in other areas as well, brilliantly so. And then the concept of embodiment, which you can see as, really taking on a world of its own in fields such as gender studies and post-colonial studies and disability studies as well. So these concepts, are what we get drawn to. And just give you an insight into my sad life. I did when I was doing my postgraduate work, I spent a year studying Habermas. So the American system, I went to study in America. The American system allowed you to do that brilliantly, you know, to do that. And I felt like I had been in a dungeon for a year, to be honest. Get out of this dungeon, I could see the light, you know, having immersed myself in the brilliance of Habermas's work on theory of communicative action and understanding the notion of the concept of intersubjectivity, which is in this book, and what that meant for my understanding of everything else. The way it expanded my critical literacy was incredible. And that's why one of the reasons why I tend to say to students, you know, make sure you read the original text in depth. Sometimes we see this as a luxury, sadly. So that's me, I think, pretty much done. So I hope you get a flavor of where I'm coming from in terms of critical pedagogy and social theory. So if anybody wants to get in touch, please do. But of course, we'll have time for questions. I think now we've got another poll. So do take a couple of minutes to respond to this. What social theory concept do you value the most in your teaching research? Thank you. Yeah, interesting to see the hidden curriculum come up there. Really, really important social theoretical concept in our field of education, for sure. And in fact, that's in the book as well. So I think I lead off with the Basil Bernstein ideas and Bourdieu as well. Habitus, of course, as well. Link that, so I touch on habitus in the body chapter. You know, people can go, well, is it there, or is it in some other? Well, actually, it belongs in the body chapter, really. Capital as well. Yeah, brilliant. Dialogue, the language chapter is all over issues to do with dialogical imagination, Bakhtin. Dialogue and discourse are huge, you know, in education, as they should be. Yeah, anti-racism, public sphere, good to see in there. Yeah, absolutely. Intersubjectivity. On my screen is right in the middle. It's brilliant. Undervalued, that idea. I see some sort of movements as well, post-structuralism, postmodernism, absolutely. Foucauldian theory and Marx as well. Great. I mean, there's so many. I mean, you know, as I said, you know, they're scattered throughout the book. But for example, in the justice chapter, the key concept is epistemic injustice. Miranda Fricker's notion, but even within, you know, the field of knowledge, key concepts. You're looking at epistemic violence, Vivac's notion, epistemicide, D'Souza Santos's notion. Even within these themes, you've got classic ideas. So thank you very much for that. Very useful. Shall we go on to? Yeah, just an indicator there. This book, the one on the left, came out last year, so it was co-edited by myself, Christina, Kieran Burke, and Rilla Rapper. So theory issues applied to the politics of higher education. That will be out in June in paperback, by the way. And then, also what's coming out, second edition of my original social theory and education research book, second edition that's coming out at the end of this month in paperback. And if you don't want to buy it, you can always get it in the library as well. So thank you for that. And now is the time for questions.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, I think we have. There's the possibility of the people listening in to type in questions, and I did type one just as an example, and somehow people have kind of voted for it to be well, I guess there's not really a lot of competition yet, but do please type in your questions, and meanwhile I'll indulge in asking you the first question, if that's okay. So the kind of thing that I had typed in there, because it's really fascinating to also go to the DNA of the book and try to understand how these things are put together. So thank you so much for that, because I think that's something that people probably appreciate. At least I did, because it's really interesting to see the rationale and the kind of how the book can be used. And I've used I use myself the chapters of social justice and knowledge in my teaching this year, and it went down a treat. So I thought this was really interesting to also see, how do you think about these ideas. So the question that I had typed in there initially, because it got 6 likes when I asked it.
Yeah, I can't see this, can I?
No, but no. I'll read it out.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So I asked, do you think social theory, and this is provocative, but maybe it's the way to start debate. Do you think social theory as critical pedagogy has a place in schools or just in higher education?
Yeah, it's a good question, Christina. And I suppose, it is provocative. Look, we're living in a world where it seems that critical unreason is expanding at a rate of knots. Where we're dealing with fake news, post-truth agendas, serious issues. I'm not a person who wants to give schools a kicking. Far from it. But we need to ask serious questions about what we've done to our education systems, where you go online and look at, Facebook forum and whatever, and the level of, I'm sorry to say, ignorance, the level of unreason is depressing. Now, look, the public sphere, the whole point of having a public sphere is to develop and provide a space for the critically reasoning public. Yeah, but if we don't develop those critical reasoning, or some people often call critical thinking skills, dialogical skills in schools, it's going to be very difficult to develop it in higher education. People can certainly change their lives around, absolutely. I know that all too well coming out of adult education. But if we don't get to that point quicker, I'm reading Robin Alexander's book, Education in Spite of Policy, just now. And Robin Alexander is saying that, we basically, we have caused serious damage to dialogic teaching, dialogical learning in schools because of all the pressures about league tables performativity. We need to bring back the subjective dialogical elements into school more. But problem is the space for them is reduced more and more because of the pressure of performativity, league tables, etc., etc. Many of you know what I'm talking about there. So yeah, to answer your question, Christina, why not? Why not? And I'd be all for it. I think leaving it to higher education when we can see the higher education is struggling itself to deliver a critical reasoning public.
Yeah. You say, because the thing is, I think one of the arguments is sometimes, and I hope that this book does bring that to people, that demystifies this aspect that social theory is difficult. And I think it is complex, but not necessarily difficult. And I think, these are two different ways, of looking at it, because once you understand that, you can run with these concepts. And so I think that's, something that, and young people these days, they really are the voice of many of the kind of the big issues of our times, including climate change, and other movements that have kind of been brought to the fore by them. So I don't, I wouldn't, discourage that as well. So thank you for answering that way. I'm trying to see if there's any more questions in the chat. So please do type them in. Denise Misu just sent a message saying, well done, Mark. I look forward to sharing this book with my doctoral students.
Hi, Denise. Yeah. And Denise being a great example of someone who's, engaged really well with Foucauldian ideas in relation to educational leadership, and really helps to enhance our knowledge of that field. A field that can come across often as atheoretical. But to position ourselves as atheoretical, we're on a hiding to nothing, because it isn't just practice. There's the link between, and just to kind of talk more generally as well. Theory itself. There's two new questions apparently, Christina.
Yes,
theory itself isn't. I in the book I did on Habermas and social research, I opened up the introduction about how Habermas himself didn't see theory to be all that. Now for people who don't know Habermas, they might think, oh, he's a grand theorist. He's all about the theory. He argued that theory itself, can only accomplish so much. I think that was a phrase. If that, he said, that the whole point of theory is to illuminate practice. That it's like to take the ideas and see if they work in context, and then to expand and update and rejig them if they don't work, if they're not as fit for purpose as they could be. It's the link between theory and practice that matters. Theory on its own, yes, it can offer I think his phrase was a magnifying glass, as somebody else called a lens. We use these kind of optical analogies, but that can only go so far. It has to be tested in practice.
So we have two questions, one from Bernadette and another one from Candice. So I'll start with Bernadette's question, because I think it came through a bit faster. Is there a case, therefore, for social theory to be taught on the PGCE?
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting question, Bernadette. It's funny how me coming out of the Irish context is interesting. So I think over the years, I think it's probably fair to say that many PGCEs have become de-theorized. And you might want to refer, and again, here's a concept for you. The curriculum is being narrowed or narrowing, where in previous incarnations, now my sister is a bit older than me, in her 50s. She did a equivalent of PGCE in Ireland, and I remember her bringing back, the core text was Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and I don't think that's a core text on many PGCEs anymore. I don't run a PGCE, but it seems to me that much of the kind of theory work is Vygotsky, kind of those kind of theories, maybe Bakhtin and so on, maybe a bit of Dewey, but you don't get, because there isn't enough space, is there? it's a classic case of curriculum narrowing because of the need to cover so many areas. But look, I think if there's anywhere it should be, it's on a PGCE. Absolutely, Brenda.
Yeah. We also have a question from Candice. To what extent do you think public sphere-like spaces can or should be created or fostered in educational environments, whether schools, higher education, or further education?
Yeah, another great question. So to what extent do I think they should be fostered? The more public spheres we have, the better. I suppose we should be careful about that because you don't want to have too much fragmentation. Point of a public sphere is to engage, in critical dialogue and debate with other people who may not necessarily share your point of view. But I think if these different public spheres can feed into a public sphere that focuses primarily on the importance of delivering certain types of education, that the public sphere will develop a critical education reasoning public that defends and upholds certain values in education. Yes, I think there's a real need for that. I think we've really fallen behind when it comes to the quality of, I mean, where is the critical reasoning public in the public sphere that we have now? Habermas's great critique was, when he was quite Adorno-esque, was that, when he wrote The Structural Transformation of the Public Sphere, was that mass media is basically killing it off. Entertainment, mass media. Now you could make the same argument. Christina might have an opinion on this with social media. The distraction of social media, the nonsense. I'm sorry, I'm guilty as well. I read a lot of nonsense. I've flicked through all these rubbish videos of cats fighting dogs. Don't blame me. You do it as well, folks. So we look at, is this the public sphere? Where is the place that we can engage with other people around issues of central concern to education? So the question that Candice asked about the expansion, yes, I suppose, but I'd like to see one that works. I'd like to see a public sphere, an education public sphere that can speak and offer alternatives to the road that we're going down, which is the degradation of public education, the de-skilling, you name it, don't get me started. We need at least a space where we can discuss alternatives. And we don't really have that. And going back to Bernard's concept, if you narrow the curriculum, if you perform so epistemic injustice, epistemic violence in the field of education, you're going to end up in a situation where we don't have a critical reasoning public in the first place. Thank you. Good question, Candice.
Any more questions?
And if anybody wants to, get in touch, feel free. mark.murphy.2@glasgow.ac.uk. If you want any further information, there might be a way. I think there might be a discount or something on the book. I'm not sure. I have to look that up from the author's perspective. So, but do, if you are in a university, if you can hire it for your library, that'd be great.
Yeah. And at Durham, it's already in the library, the digital version.
Very good.
So you can download the different chapters, which I find quite useful as well. So I don't know if there's more questions. I have more questions to ask. I could be here all day, but
yeah, it's okay.
I don't want to grill you too much either. So I don't know if we just thank you for the really good introduction to the book, and I think it kind of spices up the curiosity to the ones that hadn't yet been able to flick to the book. I think it's a really good resource. He also provides examples for teaching and can be used in that way as well.
Look at the picture on the front. Look at the picture on the front. I mean, it pretty much sums it up. In a world of fragmentation, a world of isolation, living in the bubbles. And of course, this was written during COVID as well. So, you've got these bubbles, you've got a bit of technology in there as well. But the way that we relate to each other and the way that we understand and construct knowledge collectively is part of the issue that we face. a course in education. So I see social theory offering so much of value to education in political ways, and not to be scared of the politics, because education is already political, and hence, why I started and why that was a key theme in the work. So thanks everybody for listening. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice weekend when it comes. A nice, I was gonna say nice to see you, but we don't get to see you, but nice to feel you through the question.
Thanks, Christina.
Thank you, Mark.